So, autonomic nervous system, visceral, the visceral motor system, and it's going to be subconscious. So if we look at the somatic nervous system is going to control what?
The body.
The body, in specific, skeletal muscle. So if we have somatic, all right, there's our skeletal muscle. All right, how many neurons? 2. What do we call this one?
Upper motor neuron.
Upper motor neuron and
Lower motor neuron.
lower motor neuron. Where does this happen?
And then ventral.
Ventral horn. Yes, that's the synapse. That's going to be our ventral horn. When we are talking about the autonomic nervous system, what do you notice about the number of neurons? There is an extra one. So, this is again going to be spinal cord. If we are using the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system, this is going to be lateral horn.
So if it's sympathetic, it's lateral horn?
Just the sympathetic. Okay. There are locational differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic where they originate. But if it's sympathetic, there will be a lateral horn, and that's where that synapse takes place.
Okay.
This one is going to be in a ganglion. What's a ganglion? Cluster of somas. That is
There's something else I always forget.
In the peripheral nervous system.
in the peripheral nervous system. Where are the vast majority of somas for a nervous system? What part of the nervous system?
In the brain.
Central nervous system. A lot of them are in the brain. But central nervous system, where most of the somas are. So when we have somas that are not inside the central nervous system, we call that structure a ganglion. What's the plural? Ganglia. With an A. Don't ask me why, but it's kind of like mitochondria. It's the same. And since you know about mitochondria, hopefully that will help.
Yeah.
Okay. So, big difference, structural difference is we have two nerves after the central nervous system. You get where we're going? We're going to have a ganglion. they call this one, oh, you're gonna love this. The preganglionic cell. So what should we call this one?
The postganglionic.
Post. So they took pity on us and they gave us like reasonable names to work with. That makes sense? So, cell bodies in the central nervous system, single myelinated axon is going to go to the skeletal muscle. For the autonomic nervous system, we're going to have a preganglionic cell body. The cell body's in the central nervous system, lightly myelinated. And then a postganglionic cell is not myelinated. I don't care so much as that, as long as you know that you've got a preganglionic, postganglionic. It's called a ganglion in between. So, all of these, here and here, they are going to release acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is it. Here, these are always going to use acetylcholine. And again, oh, this is acetylcholine as well. We have acetylcholine at the ganglion. But when we get here, depending on division, we can be releasing acetylcholine, or we can be releasing norepinephrine. So when we're talking about the nervous system, capital N, capital E is norepinephrine, not northeast. Northeast is MAPS, and E here is norepinephrine. So, are these going to be stimulatory effects or inhibitory effects?
Well, ACH is excitatory. Norepinephrine is, I think it's inhibitory.
Give me either. Why? What does it depend on? Okay, so it depends on what it's attached to. And it depends on what channel gets open. That ligand-gated channel. When the gate opens, if it lets in chloride, is that going to be excitatory or inhibitory?
Inhibitory.
Chloride's going to be inhibitory. If it lets in sodium, it's going to be. So really, it depends on the receptor and what channel it's linked to. Does that actually make sense this time? Didn't get to that. Okay, so it depends on the type of receptor. We have higher brain influences on both systems. Most of your cranial nerves, most of your spinal nerves will actually carry autonomic and somatic fibers. So if you're exercising, that's your skeletal muscles. But as your skeletal muscle exercises, it's going to use more energy, which means it needs more glucose and oxygen. But the autonomic nervous system controls the blood vessels, so it will respond to allow more blood to go to the area. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. So, and the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic division, is going to speed up the heart rate to meet the increased demand. Okay, so this is the very pretty picture which should be found in your textbook. And they've actually broken it down into sympathetic and parasympathetic. So here we have lower motor neuron, acetylcholine, skeletal muscle. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. One of the things I want to call your attention to is that the sympathetic preganglionic neurons are much shorter than the parasympathetic preganglionic neurons. That's getting to be a mouthful. So the non-myelinated sympathetic is longer, and the non-myelinated parasympathetic is shorter. The post-ganglionic cells are shorter. Okay. Parasympathetic will always use acetylcholine. They don't have it on here, but these always have acetylcholine. This can have norepinephrine. But there are some sympathetic, just to be crazy, that do actually use acetylcholine instead. So let's think about this beautiful organ here, the heart. We've already talked about the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. What effect does what do we use as our little 3-word tagline for sympathetic? Fight or flight. What's going to happen to your heart rate if you're in fight or flight? It's going to increase. What happens to your heart rate during parasympathetic? It decreases. Your resting heart rate is going to go down. So, one organ, the heart. When influenced by acetylcholine, what's going to happen to the heart rate? It's going to go down. So it's actually they consider that inhibitory, where it goes down. Well, what happens to the heart when it's triggered by norepinephrine? Up it goes. So it's easy because they have kind of antagonistic effects most of the time when you've got the parasympathetic versus sympathetic. You use acetylcholine in one, you use norepinephrine in the other. Make sense? It's an easy way to say, okay, this is going to slow the heart, this is going to increase the heart rate. So, parasympathetic division. Parasympathetic, this I want you to know. I want you to know it well. I want you to know what happens when you are under the influence of parasympathetic or sympathetic. I will ask you for some different organ systems or organs or processes and expect you to say this is going to increase them or this is going to decrease them. So, parasympathetic maintenance functions. I tend to call it rest and digest. There's a lot of other little taglines out there that you can use. Use whatever works for you. But this is all about energy efficiency. We're going to conserve energy when we're not active. This is going to allow lots of blood to go to the kidneys, so it can clean out toxins. It's going to allow us to digest our food. It's going to slow our heart rate, conserve energy for later. Sympathetic gets the body ready for a lot of intense physical activity. So, fight or flight. Pretty much that's the easiest way to think about it. Visceral organs are going to be influenced by parasympathetic and sympathetic, and they tend to be antagonistic. So, and it's a dynamic, it's not always all the way one or all the way the other. Usually we're somewhere in the middle. So, dynamic antagonism, depending on what we're doing. Okay, so parasympathetic, this is going to be how we are going to keep the body's energy use low. We're not using a lot of skeletal muscle. We're going to kind of turn off the blood supply to that. We're going to run the blood supply to the maintenance. Digestion. To the kidneys. Rest and digest. So you're relaxing, you're reading, maybe you're studying A&P, I don't know. Just gotta put a plug in there for studying. Blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, low. Physically, you are using a minimum of energy. But man, your guts are going for it. Your pupils are actually going to constrict, which allows you to do the reading. So it actually helps you focus. Suddenly you hear this large crash. Now, just to set the scene, perhaps you live in a first floor apartment and your significant other has left to go to work because he's working the night shift. And you hear literally what sounds like somebody crashing through the window in the spare room. What do you think happens to your heart rate? And so, the increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, you're going to actually change over from having very wet saliva to having more mucus in your saliva to help kind of dry out the mouth. Sometimes your palms will sweat. Your pupils are going to dilate so you can take in more movement. Lots of blood to the skeletal muscles, lots of blood to the heart. Causes the liver to release glucose because your muscles are going to be using it. So all of these things are happening. So you take the breath and you open the door to the spare room and you go in and you realize it's the drunken revelers who are bouncing themselves off your window on the way down to the party room in the basement. I mentioned you live on the first floor, right? Once you figure out that it's okay and nobody has actually come flying through your window, is your heart rate going to go down right away? No. It's going to stay up. It's going to stay down there. So if you think about kind of a situation where you were scared, okay, got rear-ended, I was useless the rest of that day. I was like, I have to get to work. Like, you are worth shooting, God. Because my mind was not there. I was in shock after unexpectedly being hit. I wasn't really hurt. I had a little whiplash, but I wasn't, it wasn't like I had to leave in an ambulance, but. So looking at the two different divisions, there's going to be lots of pictures, should be lots of pictures in your textbook, showing the different divisions and, actual pictures of the different organs. I went for this because it seems to be pretty simple. One of the things I want to call to parasympathetic is going to be cranial, brain, mostly brainstem, and sacral. So that's where the nerve fibers originate. These are the ones with the long preganglionic fibers. The ganglia are going to be very close to the target organ, so they're going to have very short postganglion Sympathetic is going to have a short preganglionic fiber, which comes out into what we call the sympathetic chain ganglion, even though your book is calling it something slightly different. But we're going to have sympathetic ganglia that basically are in a row, not very far from the spinal cord, not very far from the spinal column. They're actually in the abdomen. But they're pretty close. Well, thorax and abdomen. They're pretty close. So these generally have very short preganglionic fibers and long postganglionic fibers. Exception being the ones going to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland has a center part. Center part of almost anything in anatomy is going to be a medulla. So the adrenal medulla releases norepinephrine into the bloodstream as a hormone, if you will. That norepinephrine goes through the body. And you remember you discovered, hey, that was really just crazy drunk people bouncing off my windows. It wasn't somebody trying to kill me. Is your heart rate going to go down right away? No. It's going to be up for a while. Large part thanks to the fact the adrenal gland releases the norepinephrine through the body and keeps you in that hyper-aware state for a while, even when you know you're fine. Make sense? So parasympathetic is the craniosacral because they come out at the top and the bottom. Long preganglionic, which means short postganglionic. The terminal ganglia are going to be very close to or within the target organs. And this is always going to use acetylcholine. What are the effects of parasympathetic? Can you tell I'm a little focused on that? If you can't, I'm giving you a hint. I want you to know the effects of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system.
Rest and digest.
So what happens to your heart rate?
Goes down.
Goes down. Breathing rate. Glucose in the blood. Down. You're digesting, you're going to be putting it into storage. Well, if you have too much glucose, like I pretty much always do, put it in the fat. What's going to happen to your digestive activity?
Increase.
Okay, renal activity. Renal is kidneys. Get an increase. Making the pee. Okay, getting rid of toxins. Yeah, we're gonna increase that during rest and digest. So yeah, pretty much going for maintenance. Okay, sympathetic has more organs, it affects more things. Sorry, fixing grammatical errors. Okay, so thoracolumbar, preganglionic neurons, really right outside the spinal cord. These are going to have lateral horns. So the areas where you see those lateral horns, that's going to be for sympathetic. So on your lab exam, if I happen to pull down a spinal cord model and I put a little arrow over in the lateral horn and I say, what's this involved with? You're going to tell me.
Let's see.
Is it that pre-ganglionic axon?
Okay, but what happens in the lateral horns?
So
What
it's
kind of
the-
information, or what division of the autonomic nervous system is going to be involved in? So it's going to be sympathetic, which is visceral motor. Did I lose you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm looking at the autonomic one right there, where you have the lateral horn, is that where
Okay.
you're looking?
But lateral horn is sympathetic. Parasympathetic, you don't get a lateral horn.
Oh, okay, so if there's a lateral horn,
It's
sympathetic.
going to be sympathetic.
Okay.
I think we came together here. Okay, so lateral horns. If there's a lateral horn, that's sympathetic. Sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, which of course is the visceral motor. On some of those, you will notice that there is a communicating ramus. And it looks like it comes down, and then there's a ganglion that comes back up. Or the rami communicantes. That's going to be for the sympathetic nervous system. Those ganglia are what I was calling the chain. Oh, they're calling them sympathetic trunk ganglia. I have a tendency to call them sympathetic chain because they literally look like a chain. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. So as you notice, these are going to come out. They're going to form that chain. Then they are going to go to the different organs. So, what does it do to the eye? What does it do to the pupil size?
Dilate.
Dilates it, so you can see a lot of stuff. Salivary glands.
Makes it more mucus.
It's going to make it more mucousy. What is parasympathetic going to do to the eye? Okay, it's going to constrict the pupil. For parasympathetic, what's it going to do to the saliva? Less mucousy. More serous.
Yeah.
Okay, remember serous? If you're hungry and you smell something that you think smells really tasty, what starts happening in your mouth? Start having that in your mouth of water. That's watery mucus, which happens to contain more enzyme. So the serous mucus has the enzyme, or the serous saliva has more enzyme. The mucus saliva is basically just to keep your mouth from drying out. And if you get too much, you get that dry mouth. Because I guess you don't really want to salivate, spew saliva all over your enemies. So, what happens to your breathing rate? Okay, it goes up. Heart rate, up. Stomach, down. Pancreas, down. Maybe a little secretion of the glucagon to try to increase your blood sugar. Liver, gallbladder. The adrenal gland I mentioned earlier. The adrenal gland is going to do what to support sympathetic fight or flight? Releases the norepinephrine as a hormone, so it releases it into the blood. And that's going to make it, I use this crazy word called potentiate, and very few people know what it means. So it's based on the same root word as potent. So if you're going to make something more potent, So when you potentiate something, you are going to make it stronger and longer lasting. There are certain drug interactions. Give a little nod to Zach here.
Yeah.
Drug interactions that one of the ones that's somewhat problematic is tramadol. Tramadol is supposed to be a muscle relaxant. Most of the people I talk to who take tramadol by themselves, it doesn't work for crap. It's like, oh, this doesn't work. But if you put it with a painkiller, you could take a lot less of that painkiller because they work together. So it's like the tramadol potentiates the painkiller and actually will provide a lot more relief. So that's kind of potentiate. Huh?
Tramadol's the new thing because of the excessive amount of narcotics being written. Tramadol's the go-to now, so people are using now instead of Norco, because doctors won't write it. They'll come in and get 150 tablets, a script for 150 tablets of Tramadol, because it still works on opiate receptors.
Oh.
That's why they're switching to that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Doesn't work for crap on me. They're like, oh, this is supposed to be muscle relaxant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
take enough of it maybe.
come on, give me the Flexeril.
Yeah.
The problem I have with Flexeril, Flexeril's the muscle relaxant that works on me. It knocks my butt out for 12 hours. I mean, I could feel it wear off 12 hours after I took it.
People have like fractures will come in with they'll get Percocet with Flexeril. That I'm like, I don't know how you function. We tell people like don't drive, within
Yeah,
4
you don't.
hours of taking it. I'm like, I don't know how you're gonna drive, period, if you're taking those together.
Yeah.
I'm gonna feel good. I'm taking those, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. So this is just kind of a picture sort of showing these will be our sympathetic tract or sympathetic chain ganglia. Here's our little rami that are going between them. Okay. So sympathetic division. Our ganglion is going to have the synapse between the presynaptic and postsynaptic. Happens in the trunk ganglion most of the time. But sometimes those presynaptic fibers can, yeah, I skipped a lot in this. Even as short as the chapter is, there's a lot of stuff I'm like, I don't care. If you do, you can research it on your own. Like I said, at least this is like my least favorite chapter of all of A and B. So, yeah, it shows. There's still some stuff I'm expecting you to know, but I'm trying to cut out the nonsense. Okay. So synapse at the same ganglion, so it comes out of the spinal nerve and immediately synapses. That's okay. It can actually ascend or descend before synapsing. And then sometimes they will go and they'll synapse outside of the trunk. But most of them are going to actually synapse somewhere. So this is synapse in the trunk ganglion at the same level. It's going to go up or down a little before it synapses. Or it can actually go to a different ganglion. So there's options. All right, and this once again just shows all of the different organs that it can do. I want you to be able to associate the sympathetic chain or sympathetic trunk ganglion. I want you to know both names just because if I put this in the test, I might have used chain instead of trunk. The That's how I learned it a long time ago. That's what I've been calling it for years and years. And suddenly they changed the terminology on me. So, I want you to be able to recognize sympathetic, short preganglionic, long postganglionic, but coming out and being able to go to lots of different places. How quickly can you go from reading your textbook to full-on fight or flight? Fast or slow?
Pretty quick.
Super fast.
Pretty darn fast. So this is going to be able to hit a lot of organs very, very quickly. Okay, the adrenal medulla, some of the preganglionic fibers are going to go down to the adrenal medulla. Medulla is what part of the adrenal gland? The middle. So it's the center. What would the outside be? Starts with a C. Wait, no, yet. Okay, cortex. So cortex is going to be the outside, medulla is going to be the middle. Of lots and lots and lots of organs. Okay, so the cells there are going to secrete the norepinephrine and epinephrine. When they are stimulated, they release it, and it's going to release this into the blood supply. What does the adrenal medulla, what kind of effect does it have on the sympathetic nervous system?
It releases the norepinephrine.
Make it stronger and longer lasting. That great word, potentiate. Going to make it stronger and longer lasting. Okay. We have some visceral reflex arcs, just like our somatic reflex arcs. I'm not going to test you on drawing a visceral reflex arc. I'm going to test you on a somatic reflex arc. Watch for the rating. So the visceral reflex arc obviously is going to have two neurons in the motor pathway instead of just one. Visceral sensory is going to bring information up from the receptor. Usually it's going to be in the cranial nerve or dorsal root ganglia. And so we have the receptor, brings it in. What horn is that? That's a lateral horn, which means we're dealing with which division? Sympathetic. It's going to come out. Synapses in the chain ganglia and goes out to whatever that visceral effector is. So same process. We still have to have a change that's detected. The information has to be sent in for processing. And then we have the response. But this does not require a trip up to the brainstem or anywhere else in the brain to make this change. It will do the same thing every time, just like somatic reflexes. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, neurotransmitters. We're going to use kind of the big two here. Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is going to be found central nervous system. Acetylcholine will always be used at the ganglionic synapse. But at the post-ganglionic cell, if it is parasympathetic, it will always release which neurotransmitter?
ACH.
the acetylcholine. If it is sympathetic, a lot of the time it will release norepinephrine, but there are cases it can release acetylcholine. But only from the postganglionic fiber. Why would we want two different neurotransmitters for sympathetic versus parasympathetic?
They do different things.
Okay,
One's inhibitory,
one's inhibitory,
one's excitatory.
one's excitatory, such as heart rate. Okay? What effect does acetylcholine have on heart rate? It's going to go down. Why? Which division is it part of? So it's inhibitory because it's parasympathetic. And what's parasympathetic going to do to heart rate? Lower it. It'll lower it to your resting heart rate. Norepinephrine, what's it going to do to your heart rate? It's going to raise it. So just by having different neurotransmitters, that allows us to have two very different functions. That makes sense? Still depends on the receptor. All right, so here we go with those. Okay, cholinergic receptors. Are they going to respond to acetylcholine or norepinephrine? Acetylcholine. So acetylcholine has cholinergic receptors. There are two subtypes, the muscarinic and the nicotinic, just so that you've heard the names before. I'm not going into it beyond that. But there's different receptors, they're going to have different effects, but they're cholinergic. Adrenergic, adrenal. What's released from the adrenal medulla? Norepinephrine. So, adrenal, adrenergic, norepinephrine. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, both going to be considered, both going to respond to adrenergic receptors. They're divided into alpha and beta, and they each have different numbers on them. Once again, I'm not super concerned that you've memorized those at this point. But if you can remember, cholinergic, acetylcholine, adrenergic, epinephrine, norepinephrine, you're golden, at least for me. Good? Okay. Effects still depend on what's going to happen when the receptor is triggered. Some will be excitatory, some will be inhibitory. It depends on the receptor and what the receptor does, what it's linked to. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a break. I'm going to finish this up, and then I'm going to move on to vision. Oh, that's a lovely face you're making.